If you're a man over 60 and your doctor has told you that waking up multiple times each night to use the restroom is simply part of getting older, I need you to hear this clearly. That is not the full truth. It is not inevitable. It is not something you just have to accept. And the real reason it keeps happening may genuinely surprise you. There is one common daily habit, something most men do automatically, without a second thought, that is quietly driving inflammation in your prostate, fragmenting your sleep, and chipping away at your overall well-being. And almost nobody is talking about it. Not your peers, not your family, and often, not even your physician. I'm Dr. Laura, a physician specializing in male health for the past 13 years. My work focuses on prostate wellness, hormonal balance, urinary health, and the full spectrum of conditions that affect how men feel, function, and thrive as they age. In that time, I've helped countless men in their 60s, 70s, and beyond rediscover their energy, their sleep, and their sense of vitality. Today, I want to help you do the same. Most men assume prostate enlargement is purely age-related, but age is only part of the story. What if the bigger driver isn't how old you are, but what you do every single day? What if a pattern of overlooked behaviors is triggering a slow, silent inflammation, one that produces urgency, a weakened stream, and those relentless nighttime bathroom trips? Stay with me. Over the next several minutes, I'll walk you through exactly what that habit is, why it causes so much damage, and how to begin reversing it, naturally, without jumping straight to medication or invasive procedures. I'll also share a simple 15-second bedtime routine that many of my patients use to finally sleep through the night and wake up feeling like themselves again. Before we dive in, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and turn on notifications so you never miss a prostate health tip tailored specifically for men over 60. And tell me in the comments, does this topic feel relevant to you? Type 1 if yes, 0 if not. It helps me understand how to serve you better. Let's begin. Habit number 10. Cutting back on water to avoid nighttime trips. In 13 years of practice, one of the most common things I hear from men in their 60s and 70s is this: I've started drinking less water in the evening so I don't wake up at night. And every time, I have to gently explain why that well-intentioned strategy often backfires. The logic seems sound: less fluid in, fewer trips to the bathroom. But here's what that reasoning misses. When you restrict water intake too aggressively, particularly later in the day, your urine becomes highly concentrated. It grows darker, more acidic, and significantly more irritating to the bladder lining. That irritation generates pressure, and that pressure bears directly on an already sensitive prostate. The outcome is often the opposite of what you hoped for: more urgency, not less. A chronically irritated bladder becomes hyperactive. It begins sending premature signals to empty, even when it's only partially full. That's why so many men find themselves awake at 1 a.m., then 3 a.m., then 5 a.m., often passing only a small amount each time. It's exhausting, discouraging, and over time, deeply erosive to confidence and quality of life. I've had patients tell me with complete sincerity that all they want is one uninterrupted night of sleep. I understand that. And the answer, clinically, is not less water, it's smarter hydration. Dehydration is actually one of the most under-recognized contributors to prostate inflammation. Without adequate fluid intake, the body cannot efficiently flush metabolic waste. Tissues become prone to swelling, and cellular repair slows significantly. The practical approach: hydrate consistently throughout the day, beginning in the morning. Don't rely on thirst as your cue. By the time you feel thirsty, you're already mildly dehydrated. Aim for pale, straw-colored urine as your benchmark. And if nighttime urgency concerns you, simply taper your fluid intake roughly 90 minutes before bed, but don't cut it off entirely. Water is not the problem. It is one of your most accessible, cost-free tools for calming bladder irritability, reducing prostate pressure, and improving sleep quality. Habit number 9. Prolonged sitting without movement. I had a patient, a retired school administrator, proud of the rest he'd earned, who spent the majority of his day seated, reading, watching television, doing puzzles, and he genuinely didn't understand why his prostate symptoms were worsening. Here's what extended sitting does. It places sustained, low-level compression on the pelvic region. That compression reduces circulatory flow to the prostate. When blood flow diminishes, the body's ability to deliver anti-inflammatory nutrients and remove cellular waste drops significantly. The surrounding tissues begin to swell. Men often notice the effects gradually: increased urgency, a weakened stream, vague pelvic discomfort. Because the onset is slow, many men don't connect it to their sitting habits until the symptoms become pronounced. The human body is architecturally designed for movement. Circulation, hormonal balance, tissue repair, all of these depend on regular physical activity. And for men over 60, intentional movement is one of the most evidence-supported ways to protect prostate health. The intervention doesn't require a gym or an elaborate fitness plan. One practical rule makes a meaningful difference. Stand up every 30 minutes. Stand, stretch, take a few steps, set a gentle phone reminder if needed. These brief movement breaks release pelvic compression, restore blood flow, and keep your body physiologically engaged. My patient followed this advice. Within 2 weeks, he was sleeping more soundly. Within a month, he described feeling noticeably more energized and more in command of his body. A still body, as I often say, creates the conditions for silent problems. A body in motion creates the conditions for healing. Habit number 8. Excessive caffeine consumption. I'll be transparent with you. I understand the appeal of a morning cup of coffee. For many of the retired men I see, that quiet ritual is genuinely meaningful. But after more than a decade treating prostate-related conditions, I've seen clearly how excess caffeine, even from familiar sources like coffee, black tea, or cola, can quietly undermine both bladder and prostate health. Caffeine is a stimulant that doesn't limit its effects to mental alertness. It activates the entire urinary system, increasing urine output and stimulating bladder muscle contractions. In a younger man with no underlying prostate changes, this may be a minor inconvenience. In a man over 60, whose prostate may already be experiencing some degree of enlargement, that additional stimulation can cross a threshold. The result? More frequent urgency, incomplete emptying, the persistent sense of pressure that so many men describe. One of my patients, a man who was drinking coffee in the morning, iced tea in the afternoon, and a cola in the evening, had never questioned the habit. When I asked him to moderate his intake and shift to herbal or decaffeinated alternatives after his morning coffee, he was skeptical. Within 10 days, his nighttime disruptions decreased noticeably. His urinary stream felt more consistent. His confidence around sleep returned. My recommendation isn't abstinence, it's moderation. Enjoy that morning cup. But consider making it your last caffeinated beverage of the day. Your prostate and your sleep architecture may respond faster than you'd expect. Habit number 7. Regular consumption of processed and spicy foods. A 68-year-old patient of mine, active, motivated, genuinely trying to improve his health, came to me frustrated. He had reduced his soda intake. He was walking more. His nighttime urgency persisted. When I reviewed his diet, the pattern became clear. Bacon at breakfast, processed deli meat at lunch, spicy chili at dinner. Here's the clinical reality. Food is not merely fuel. Every meal sends biochemical signals to your body's tissues. Highly processed foods, packaged meats, frozen meals, preserved snacks are dense with industrial additives, trans fats, and compounds that promote systemic inflammation. For a prostate that is already enlarged or sensitized, those inflammatory signals act as accelerants. Spicy foods introduce an additional layer of concern. Capsaicin compounds found in hot peppers and chili-based preparations can directly irritate the bladder wall and the surrounding pelvic nerve network. When those nerves are overstimulated, the bladder may signal urgency even when it isn't functionally full, producing frequency, reduced control, and discomfort that feels disproportionate to the actual volume present. Beyond inflammation, there is a hormonal dimension. Diets high in trans fats and refined sugars are associated with elevated estrogen and suppressed testosterone, a hormonal profile that is a documented contributor to prostate tissue growth. When my patient shifted toward whole, minimally processed foods, lean proteins, leafy greens, healthy fats, berries, nuts. He didn't just report reduced urinary symptoms. He said, I feel clearer, more like myself. That's the clinical and human impact of eating to support your biology rather than working against it. You don't need perfection. You need consistent, incremental improvement. Habit number 6. Regularly delaying urination. This habit gets dismissed more often than almost any other. I was busy. The game was on. I didn't want to stop. As a clinician, I hear these explanations regularly, and I understand the practicality behind them. But habitually postponing urination is one of the most underestimated sources of prostate strain that I encounter in practice. Each time you override the urge to urinate, your bladder distends beyond its functional capacity. Think of it as inflating a balloon repeatedly past its optimal volume. That distension creates downward mechanical pressure directly on the prostate. In men over 60, whose prostate tissue is less resilient than it once was, that repeated pressure causes irritation, microtrauma to the surrounding nerves and muscles, and progressive tissue swelling. The downstream effects, a weakened urinary stream, incomplete emptying, and paradoxically, increased frequency, the body's alarm system responding to accumulated insult. There is also an infectious dimension. Incomplete bladder emptying leaves residual urine that provides a favorable environment for bacterial colonization. Recurrent urinary tract infections produce their own cycle of prostate and bladder inflammation, compounding the original problem. I treated a retired firefighter who had spent decades conditioning himself to suppress urgency during long emergency shifts. At 67, he was waking 5 times per night and experiencing near constant pelvic discomfort. When I explained the mechanism, he said quietly, I wish someone had told me that years ago. The guidance is simple. Respond when your body signals the need. Timely voiding is not a sign of poor discipline, it is sound physiological management. Habit number 5. Smoking and secondhand smoke exposure. A 72-year-old patient of mine, a retired construction worker, strong-willed and self-disciplined, had quit smoking a full decade before coming to see me. His prostate symptoms had not resolved. When I asked about his environment, he mentioned his weekly poker group, where several friends still smoked regularly. That detail mattered clinically. The prostate is highly sensitive to environmental toxins. Cigarette smoke, whether inhaled directly or encountered as second-hand exposure, releases thousands of chemical compounds, many of which constrict blood vessels, reduce tissue oxygenation, and sustain a state of chronic systemic inflammation. That inflammatory burden extends to prostate tissue, where it impairs cellular repair, stiffens the vascular architecture, and activates immune responses that maintain rather than resolve the inflammatory state. For men over 60, the body's natural detoxification capacity has already declined. Even intermittent smoke exposure can have a disproportionate impact on prostate tissue health. Long-term exposure has been associated in the research literature not only with accelerated benign prostate enlargement, but with increased risk of more serious prostate conditions. If you currently smoke, I want to say this with genuine compassion. Cessation is one of the most impactful steps you can take for your prostate, your cardiovascular system, and your overall longevity. Support exists: behavioral programs, pharmacological aids, counseling. And if you've already quit, that matters enormously. But remain alert to secondary exposure. Your prostate is still vulnerable. My patient restructured his social environment, hosting gatherings in a smoke-free space instead of attending smoke-filled ones. His sleep quality improved within weeks. His nighttime urgency decreased. He described it as turning the volume down on his discomfort. Habit number 4. Skipping annual prostate screenings. Not long ago, a 66-year-old man came into my office, well presented, clearly uncomfortable, and carrying over a year of worsening symptoms that he had been silently managing alone. When I asked why he had waited so long to seek evaluation, he said simply, "I didn't want to know." This is more common than most people realize. Men, particularly those raised in environments that equated endurance with strength, often delay medical care until symptoms become impossible to ignore. And I understand the psychology. But here is the clinical problem with waiting. The prostate does not announce its difficulties loudly. It whispers. A slightly reduced urinary stream, an occasional extra nighttime trip, mild, vague pelvic pressure. By the time the signal is impossible to ignore, the underlying condition may be significantly advanced. The inverse is also true. When prostate conditions are identified early, the management options are considerably broader, less invasive, and more effective. A routine annual evaluation, including a physical assessment, a PSA blood test, and where clinically indicated, additional screening, provides information that can be genuinely life-preserving. I want to reframe the way many men think about medical checkups. You schedule routine maintenance for your vehicle, not because it's already failing, but to ensure it doesn't. Your body deserves the same standard of care. My patient's results came back early enough to allow a straightforward, non-invasive management plan. A few months later, he told me, "I wish I hadn't waited. I spent a year worrying about something that didn't have to be that complicated." When did you last have your prostate evaluated? If it's been more than 12 months, I'd encourage you to schedule that appointment. Not because something is necessarily wrong, but because staying well requires staying informed. Habit number 3. High intake of red and processed meat. A 70-year-old patient, a retired Navy veteran and self-described lifelong meat enthusiast, came to me with interrupted sleep, a sluggish urinary stream, and persistent lower pelvic discomfort. When I reviewed his dietary pattern, red and processed meats featured prominently at nearly every meal. I'm not here to eliminate cultural food traditions or dismiss genuine enjoyment of food, but I do need to share what the clinical evidence shows clearly. Diets high in red and processed meats, including cured meats, sausages, deli preparations, and frequently consumed steaks, are associated with elevated markers of systemic inflammation and a documented increase in prostate-related health risks. The mechanism involves multiple pathways. Saturated fats from animal sources promote inflammatory signaling throughout the body. Chemical preservatives in processed meats, nitrates, nitrites, and various additives contribute additional pro-inflammatory load. Over time, this chronic low-grade inflammation acts as an aggravating factor for prostate enlargement, urinary symptoms, and hormonal imbalance. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have linked high red and processed meat consumption to elevated risk of more serious prostate conditions. The dietary choices you make consistently are among the most modifiable factors in your prostate health trajectory. When my patient reduced his red meat intake to once or twice per week and incorporated leaner proteins, poultry, fish, legumes, he returned within weeks describing something I hear often after dietary shifts. "I didn't realize how heavy I was feeling until I stopped." You don't need to eliminate animal protein from your diet. Balance and frequency are the key variables. Prioritize whole, minimally processed food sources. Your prostate responds to dietary composition more responsively than most men expect. Habit number 2. Excess abdominal weight. A 64-year-old patient of mine, good-humored, thoughtful, genuinely puzzled by the connection, sat across from me and asked, "How much damage can some extra weight around the middle really do?" More than most men realize, particularly to prostate health. Excess abdominal adipose tissue is not metabolically inert. It is biologically active, producing hormonal signals and inflammatory compounds that affect the entire body. One of its most clinically significant actions is aromatization, the conversion of testosterone into estrogen within fat tissue. As estrogen levels rise and testosterone declines, prostate tissue receives a hormonal signal that promotes growth. This contributes directly to enlargement, increased urinary frequency, reduced stream strength, and persistent pelvic pressure. Abdominal fat also produces pro-inflammatory cytokines that burden the cardiovascular system, impair blood sugar regulation, and compromise circulatory function, all of which have downstream effects on urinary health and overall vitality. The encouraging clinical reality is that significant weight loss is not required to produce meaningful improvement. Research indicates that a 5% reduction in body weight can produce measurable improvements in prostate-related urinary symptoms. The path forward doesn't need to be dramatic to be effective. For my patient, the starting point was straightforward: a morning walk, replacing sugar-sweetened beverages with water, and adding one additional vegetable serving to dinner each evening. Within weeks, his nighttime disruptions decreased. His energy improved. He told me, "It's not just the physical symptoms, it feels like I'm reclaiming something." Your waistline is an informative clinical indicator. When you take steps to address it, you are doing far more than changing your appearance. You are restoring hormonal and metabolic equilibrium at a foundational level. Habit number 1: chronic, unmanaged stress. Of everything we've discussed today, hydration, movement, diet, screening, this is the factor that men most consistently underestimate. And in my clinical experience, it may carry more influence over prostate health than any single item on this list. I've sat with many men who present as composed, capable, and controlled, while carrying decades of accumulated stress beneath the surface. One patient told me directly, "I'm not the kind of person who talks about stress. I just keep going." That response is deeply familiar to me. Men of this generation were largely raised to absorb pressure without acknowledgement. But what we now understand physiologically is that chronic stress doesn't stay contained in the mind. It manifests in body tissue. And the prostate is among its most responsive targets. Sustained psychological stress drives chronically elevated cortisol production. Cortisol promotes systemic inflammation, creates persistent tension in the pelvic floor musculature, disrupts testosterone production, and fragments sleep architecture. Over time, this hormonal environment lowers stress tolerance, heightens sensitivity to pelvic pressure and discomfort, and creates conditions in which prostate symptoms develop and resist resolution. Men under chronic stress often notice related signs without identifying the source: shortened patience, reduced motivation, disrupted sleep, and a generalized sense of diminished vitality. These are not separate issues. They are interconnected expressions of a body under sustained physiological strain. When my patient began to address his stress, 10 minutes of structured breathing daily, a morning walk, periodic journaling, intentional social connection, and permission to rest without guilt, his urinary urgency decreased. His sleep improved. He said, "I didn't understand how much I was carrying until I started putting some of it down." Stress management is not a soft or optional component of prostate health. It is a clinically supported, physiologically essential intervention. It may also be the foundation that makes every other habit on this list easier to sustain. You are not broken. You are simply underinformed. In 13 years of practice, I have sat with hundreds of men who arrived feeling frustrated, isolated, and quietly frightened about what was happening to their bodies. And I want to say this to you with the same clarity I offer every one of them. You are not broken. You are not beyond help. You have simply been operating without complete information. We've walked through 10 modifiable daily habits: insufficient hydration, prolonged sitting, excess caffeine, processed and spicy foods, delayed voiding, smoke exposure, skipped screenings, high red meat intake, abdominal weight, and unmanaged stress. Each one, in isolation, may seem manageable. Together, over months and years, they create a compounding biological environment in which the prostate enlarges, sleep deteriorates, and a man's sense of control quietly erodes. But here is what I want you to carry forward from this conversation more than anything else. The course can change. Not through radical, overnight transformation, but through awareness and small, consistent actions taken with intention. Through listening to your body rather than overriding it. Through treating your own health with the same seriousness you would bring to someone you love. One of the most effective tools I offer patients is what I call the 15-second bedtime routine. A brief, evidence-aligned practice designed to reduce pelvic tension, calm the nervous system, and support both bladder and prostate function during sleep. Men who incorporate it consistently report waking less frequently, sleeping more deeply, and feeling more grounded in the morning. And it requires nothing more than 15 seconds of your attention before you close your eyes. Here's what I'd encourage you to do right now. Review the 10 habits we covered. Choose the one that feels most immediately relevant to your life and begin there. Not perfectly, progressively. You are not too old for this to matter. It is not too late for your body to respond. If this video provided something useful to you, I'd appreciate a like. It tells me this information is reaching the people who need it. Share it with a man in your life who may be silently dealing with these symptoms. And leave a comment below. Which habit resonated most strongly with you? Your engagement helps me understand how to serve this community better. Thank you for being here. Let's keep moving forward together.